Organizing their paperwork, I found their will. Every asset, every penny, was going to my younger brother Nathan. Nothing for me. If you want to know why I finally stopped paying their bills, grab your drink and settle in. Before I start this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if family drama gets your attention. Growing up as the older brother in our household meant one thing: responsibility. From as early as I can remember, I was the one expected to set the example, to be the rock of the family. My parents, Harold and Linda, weren't subtle about the different expectations they had for Nathan and me. While I was pushed to excel in school, maintain a part-time job, and help around the house, Nathan seemed to float through life with minimal consequences. Our childhood home in suburban Chicago was modest but comfortable. Dad worked as an insurance adjuster, and Mom was a part-time receptionist at a dental office. We weren't wealthy, but we never went without necessities. What we did have, though, was a clear family hierarchy, with Nathan somehow always at the top. I can still remember my high school graduation when I received honors for maintaining a 4.0 GPA while working 20 hours a week at the local hardware store. My parents' response: "That's what we expect from you, Corey." 2 years later, when Nathan barely graduated with a 2.1 GPA and no job, they threw him a massive party, calling him a late bloomer who had overcome adversity. The pattern continued into our college years. I worked multiple jobs to put myself through state university, eventually graduating with a degree in business administration and only $15,000 in student loans, which I paid off within 3 years. Nathan, on the other hand, bounced between 4 different colleges, changing majors each time, with our parents footing the entire bill. He finally settled on a communications degree that took him 6 years to complete. By the time we were in our 20s, the contrast between us couldn't have been more stark. I had secured a position at a financial consulting firm, purchased a small but well-maintained condo, and started building my savings. Nathan lived in our parents' basement, rent-free, working sporadically as a bartender, while claiming to be networking for his big break in the music industry. The real shift in our family dynamic came when our parents began experiencing financial difficulties. Dad retired earlier than planned due to health issues, a combination of high blood pressure and early signs of heart disease. Mom had already reduced her hours at the dental office due to her worsening arthritis. Their fixed income wasn't enough to cover their mortgage, medical expenses, and the lifestyle they'd grown accustomed to. That's when I stepped in. 3 years ago, at 29, I began covering their mortgage payments. $1,300 monthly for a house they really couldn't afford. Then came the medical bills, which averaged around $800 monthly after insurance. Utilities, property taxes, home repairs, the list grew longer each month, eventually totaling nearly $3,000 that I was transferring to them regularly. During all this time, Nathan continued living in their basement, contributing nothing to household expenses. In fact, he often asked them for money, which they somehow always managed to find for him. I would watch in disbelief as Nathan showed up driving a new leased car or sporting expensive sneakers while I was transferring a significant portion of my salary to keep our parents afloat. "Nathan's still finding himself," Mom would say when I broached the subject. "Besides, you're doing so well, and we're so proud of how responsible you are." Their pride didn't translate into fair treatment. At family gatherings, Nathan remained the golden child. His occasional bartending shifts were celebrated as if he'd launched a Fortune 500 company. My consistent support and career achievements were treated as expected, barely worthy of acknowledgement. Every Sunday dinner became an exercise in restraint. I would sit quietly as Dad raved about how Nathan had real potential and was just waiting for his big break. Meanwhile, I was the one ensuring they could keep their home, afford their medications, and maintain their dignity in retirement. "You just don't understand the creative industry," Dad would lecture me whenever I suggested Nathan might contribute to the household expenses. "Your brother has to focus on his networking and connections. That's how people make it in music production." The fact that Nathan had yet to produce a single track or book a single client never seemed to factor into their assessment. His potential was always just around the corner, while my actual achievements were simply what was expected of the responsible firstborn. Despite the unfairness, I continued supporting them. They were my parents, after all. And I couldn't bear the thought of them losing their home or going without necessary medical care. I rationalized that family takes care of family even when the care isn't reciprocated equally. Little did I know how drastically my perspective would change with one accidental discovery. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon last October when everything changed. My parents had asked me to help organize their filing cabinet, a task that Nathan was apparently too busy to assist with despite living in their house. Dad had mentioned wanting to get their papers in order just in case, which I took as a responsible step given their aging and health issues. I arrived at 10 in the morning, armed with new file folders, labels, and document organizers I'd purchased. Mom was at her monthly book club, and Dad was watching a football game in the living room. Nathan, unsurprisingly, was nowhere to be seen, probably still asleep after a late-night bartending shift or so, he claimed. "Everything's a mess in there," Dad said, gesturing toward their home office, without looking away from the game. "Just organize it, however you think is best. We trust your judgment." The filing cabinet was indeed a disaster. Tax returns mixed with medical records, insurance policies stuffed alongside old birthday cards, and random receipts scattered throughout. I started by creating logical categories: financial documents, medical information, household records, and personal papers. 3 hours into the task, I found it. A sealed envelope labeled "Last Will" and Testament of Harold and Linda Weston at the back of the bottom drawer. It wasn't sealed well. The flap had come loose over time. I wasn't looking to snoop, but the corner of the document was visible, and my own name caught my eye. My heart rate quickened as I slid the document out. I told myself I was just confirming it was current and properly stored. As the executor of their estate, a responsibility I'd assumed would eventually fall to me, I should be familiar with their wishes, right? I unfolded the papers, noting the date. Just 6 months earlier. This wasn't some outdated document. This was their current will, recently drafted and notarized. My eyes scanned the pages, looking for the distribution of assets section. The words hit me like a physical blow. "We hereby bequeath all our property, both real and personal, including but not limited to our residence, at 1482 Maple Avenue. All bank accounts, investment portfolios, insurance policies, personal effects, and all other assets of any kind to our son, Nathan James Weston." I flipped to the next page, then back again, certain there must be more. There had to be a section addressing what I would receive. But there wasn't. The only other mention of my name came in a single sentence. "We have intentionally made no provision for our son, Corey Allen Weston." Intentionally. That word burned into my consciousness. This wasn't an oversight or a draft. This was their deliberate decision. My hands trembled as I returned the will to its envelope. The house around me suddenly felt foreign, as if I was standing in a place I'd never been before. The walls of the home I'd helped maintain the roof I was currently paying for. None of it would ever be mine. Not even a small portion. I walked to the living room in a daze, the document clutched in my hand. Dad looked up from his game, his expression shifting from annoyance at the interruption to concern when he saw my face. "What's wrong? Did you find something about our medical insurance?" he asked. I held up the will. "I found this." His face fell. "You weren't supposed to see that." "Clearly," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside. "Were you ever going to tell me?" He sighed, reaching for the remote to mute the television. Your mother and I made that decision carefully, Corey. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think I said. You're leaving everything to Nathan. Nothing to me. After everything I've done for you both, Nathan needs it more, Dad said, as if that explained everything. You're established, successful. You have your condo, your career, your savings. Nathan doesn't have those things. He needs a safety net. A safety net, I repeated incredulously. I'm the one paying your mortgage. I'm the one covering your medical bills. I'm the one who's been supporting this family for years, while Nathan contributes nothing. That's different, Dad insisted. You can afford to help us now. But Nathan, he's still finding his way. Without this inheritance, he'll have nothing when we're gone. And whose fault is that, I asked. He's 29 years old, living in your basement, working part-time at best. He's had every advantage, every opportunity, and he's squandered all of it. Meanwhile, I've worked for everything I have with minimal help from you and Mom. Dad's expression hardened. You've always been harder on your brother than we are. You don't understand his creative spirit, his potential. His potential, I laughed bitterly. Dad, I've been hearing about Nathan's potential for 20 years. When does potential have to show actual results? The front door opened, and Mom walked in, her book club tote bag in hand. She froze when she saw us, immediately sensing the tension. What's going on? She asked cautiously. Dad gestured to the will in my hand. Corey found our will. Mom's face paled. Oh, that single syllable confirmed everything. There was no surprise, no confusion. Just resignation that I'd discovered their secret. Why? I asked her directly. Why would you cut me out completely? Honey, we're not cutting you out, she said, setting down her bag and approaching me like I was a wounded animal that might lash out. We're just being practical. You don't need our help like Nathan does. So I'm being punished for being responsible, I asked. For building a life for myself. For helping you when you needed it. No one's being punished, she insisted. We're just trying to be fair. Fair. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. There's nothing fair about this. I've given you thousands of dollars. I've put my own financial future on hold to make sure you're taken care of. And your response is to leave everything to Nathan. You're making this about money, Dad interjected. It's not about money. It's about need. It is about money, I countered. It's about the money I've given you. It's about the inheritance that represents your life, your legacy, your appreciation for the people who cared for you. And you've decided that I deserve none of it. Mom started crying, which was always her response when confronted with uncomfortable truths. We love you both equally, she insisted through tears. This doesn't change that, but it did change everything. As I stood there looking at my parents, the people I thought valued fairness and responsibility, I realized how deeply I'd misunderstood our family dynamic. I wasn't the responsible son they were proud of. I was the reliable resource they could exploit, while favoring my brother. I need some air, I said, finally placing the will on the coffee table and walking toward the door. Corey, wait. Mom called after me. Let's talk about this calmly. But there was nothing left to say. The will had spoken volumes about their true feelings, and no explanation could erase what I'd seen in black and white. The drive home from my parents' house that day remains a blur in my memory. I don't recall the route I took or how long it took me to get back to my condo. I only remember the numbing sense of betrayal that seemed to hollow out my chest with each passing mile. Once home, I sat in my parked car for nearly an hour, staring at nothing, my mind replaying the discovery of the will and the subsequent conversation with my parents. Their words echoed, "Nathan needs it more." The implication being that my hard work, my sacrifices, my support meant I deserved less from them, not more. The next few days passed in a fog of disbelief and hurt. I called in sick to work on Monday, something I'd done maybe twice in my entire career. I couldn't focus, couldn't summon the energy to maintain my usual professional demeanor. My boss, concerned by my uncharacteristic absence, texted to check if I was all right. I responded with a vague mention of family issues and promised to be back the following day. Sleep became elusive. I would lie awake until 3 or 4 in the morning, mentally calculating all I had given my parents over the years. The mortgage payments alone totaled nearly $50,000. Add in medical bills, utilities, home repairs, and miscellaneous expenses, and I'd given them well over $70,000 in just 3 years. $70,000 that could have gone toward my own retirement, a down payment on a house instead of my condo, or even simple pleasures I'd denied myself to ensure they were taken care of. My phone buzzed regularly with texts and calls from Mom, which I initially ignored. Her voicemail started with concern, then shifted to guilt-inducing remarks about how I was worrying them by not responding. Dad called only once, leaving a terse message about how I was overreacting to something that doesn't even matter until we're dead anyway. By Wednesday, I felt compelled to at least let them know I was alive, so I sent a brief text. I need space to process this. Please respect that. Mom responded immediately with a tearful emoji and, "We love you so much." Dad didn't respond at all. That evening, I finally called my best friend, Travis. We'd been friends since college, and he was one of the few people who truly understood my family dynamic, having witnessed it firsthand over the years. They did what Travis exclaimed when I told him about the will. "After everything you've done for them, that's beyond messed up, man." "I keep thinking I'm overreacting," I admitted. "Maybe it's their money, their choice." "Bullshit," Travis replied bluntly. "It stopped being just their money when you started paying their bills. You've invested in them, literally and figuratively. And they're basically saying, your investment gets no return, while Nathan, who's invested nothing, gets everything." When Travis put it that way, the injustice seemed even more glaring. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. I sighed. "What can I do? It's their will." "You can stop paying their bills," Travis suggested immediately. "Why? Keep financing a house that's explicitly going to your deadbeat brother." The thought had crossed my mind, but I'd dismissed it as petty. Hearing someone else suggest it gave the idea more weight. "They're still my parents," I said weakly. "They need the help." "And Nathan is still their son," Travis countered. "Let him help for a change." Despite Travis's advice, I continued making the payments that month. The mortgage transfer went through automatically on the 1st of the month. The check for their medical bills was mailed on the 5th. The utilities were paid on the 10th. But each transaction felt different now. Not acts of love and duty, but obligations I was fulfilling, under false pretenses. Every time I checked my bank account and saw the transfers, resentment bubbled up anew. I'd think about Nathan probably sleeping in late in the very house I was paying for, contributing nothing while being promised everything. My parents seemed to sense my internal struggle. They called less frequently, and when we did speak, they carefully avoided mentioning both the will and the financial support I provided. It was as if they hoped that by not acknowledging either topic, the contradiction between them would somehow dissolve. Nathan remained oblivious to the entire situation, or at least pretended to be. He texted me occasionally with his usual requests, asking if I wanted to split the cost of a birthday gift for Mom, hinting that he was short on cash for the weekend, as if nothing had changed. I responded minimally, unable to muster the energy for our usual fraternal banter. As weeks passed, my resentment calcified into something harder, colder. I began cataloging all the sacrifices I'd made for my family over the years. The summer I worked 2 jobs to help when Dad was temporarily laid off. The vacation I canceled when Mom needed someone to drive her to physical therapy appointments. The countless weekends spent fixing things around their house. Instead of enjoying my limited free time, The list grew longer, the injustice sharper. Yet still, I made the payments. November's mortgage, medical bills, utilities, all paid on time. December, too. Each transfer was accompanied by a deepening sense that I was being taken advantage of, that my sense of duty was being exploited. The breaking point didn't come during a dramatic confrontation or emotional outburst. It arrived quietly on a Sunday evening in January, as I scrolled through Instagram and saw Nathan's latest post a picture of his brand new gaming system, complete with virtual reality headset and premium accessories. The caption read, "Early birthday present to myself. Sometimes you just gotta treat yourself right." The system easily cost $2,000, more than I'd spent on myself for anything non-essential in the past year. $2,000, while he contributed nothing to the household expenses. $2,000, while I transferred $3,000 to our parents each month. Something shifted inside me at that moment, a quiet clicking into place of a decision I'd been approaching for months. Family takes care of family, yes. But care should be reciprocal, appreciation should be expressed, and fairness should be valued. None of those conditions existed in my relationship with my parents and brother. It was time for things to change. The morning after seeing Nathan's Instagram post, I called into work and requested a personal day. This was not a decision I would make hastily or emotionally. If I was going to withdraw financial support from my parents, I needed to approach it methodically and understand all implications. My first step was to review my own finances. How much had I actually been giving them monthly? How had it affected my own financial goals? Opening my financial tracking spreadsheet, I created a new tab specifically to document every penny I'd given my parents over the past 3 years. The mortgage payments, 36 months at $1,300 each, totaled $46,800. Medical expenses, averaging $800 monthly for 36 months, came to $28,800. Utilities, property taxes, home repairs, and miscellaneous expenses, conservatively estimated at $900, monthly totaling $32,400. The grand total made me physically recoil from my computer screen, $108,000. In just 3 years, I had given my parents enough money to make a substantial down payment on a house of my own, enough to have fully funded my retirement accounts for those years, enough to have taken that international trip I'd always dreamed of and still had plenty left over. Instead, I'd invested in a house that would never be mine for parents who didn't value my sacrifice enough to include me in their will. My next step was to understand any legal obligations I might have. I wasn't sure if I could be held responsible for my parents' bills simply because I'd been paying them voluntarily. I needed professional advice. I called Richard Bennett, an attorney I'd met through work who specialized in family and elder law. He agreed to see me that afternoon. "Legally speaking, you have no obligation to continue supporting your parents financially," Richard confirmed after I explained the situation. "Unless you've signed contracts assuming responsibility for their debts, these are voluntary payments you've been making." "What about filial responsibility laws?" I asked, having researched the topic briefly. "Don't some states require adult children to support their parents?" "Those laws exist in some states, yes," Richard acknowledged. "But they're rarely enforced and typically only come into play when parents are destitute and requiring state assistance. Your parents have assets, their house for one, and presumably some retirement income. They're not destitute." I nodded, processing this information. "And the fact that I've been paying these bills for years, does that create any kind of implied contract?" "No," Richard said firmly. "You can stop voluntary payments at any time. I would, however, recommend giving them notice rather than simply stopping payments without warning. That's not a legal requirement, just a practical suggestion to minimize drama." "What about their will?" I asked. "Is there anything I can do about being excluded?" Richard's expression softened with sympathy. Unfortunately, parents have broad discretion in how they distribute their assets. Unless you can prove they were mentally incompetent when they created the will, or were under undue influence, challenging it would be difficult and likely unsuccessful. I thanked Richard for his time and advice, feeling both relieved about my legal position and saddened that the will situation was essentially unchangeable. My final step before making a decision was a frank conversation with my parents. Not over the phone where emotions could be easily hidden or manipulated, but face to face. I drove to their house the following evening, having texted ahead to ensure they would both be home. I deliberately chose a time when Nathan would be working at the bar, wanting this conversation to be just between the three of us. Mom greeted me with excessive enthusiasm, clearly relieved I was speaking to them again. Dad was more reserved, watching me cautiously as I declined coffee and asked to talk in the living room. I've been thinking a lot about our family dynamic, I began once we were all seated, specifically about the financial support I provide and how it relates to your decision about the will. Mom immediately looked uncomfortable. Honey, those are two completely separate things. They're not separate at all, I countered calmly. They're directly connected. I've calculated that I've given you over $100,000 in the past 3 years alone. Dad shifted in his seat. Nobody forced you to help us. That's true, I acknowledged. I helped because I love you. And because I thought we shared certain values, like reciprocity and fairness. We do value what you've done, Mom insisted, tears already forming. We appreciate it so much. Appreciation is usually expressed through actions, not just words, I said. Your will makes it clear that despite my contributions, you value Nathan more. That's not fair, Dad interjected. The will isn't about valuing one of you more than the other. It's about ensuring Nathan has something when we're gone. And what about ensuring I get something back from the significant financial investment I've made in you, I asked. What about acknowledging my contributions? Mom wiped at her tears. We never asked you to make those payments expecting something in return. Maybe not explicitly, I agreed. But there's an implied social contract in families. Support goes both ways. I've supported you financially. You've chosen not to support me in your estate planning. Dad's expression hardened. So, this is an ultimatum. Include you in the will, or you'll stop helping us. It's not an ultimatum, I clarified. It's a boundary. I'm no longer willing to financially support a situation where my contributions are taken for granted and my brother is rewarded for contributing nothing. What exactly are you saying? Mom asked, her voice trembling. I'm saying that I will no longer be paying your mortgage, medical bills, or any other expenses, I stated clearly. I'll make February's payments since they're already scheduled, but after that you'll need to find another solution. The ensuing conversation was painful and circular. My parents cycled through guilt trips, accusations of selfishness, reminders of all they'd done for me as a child, and finally desperate appeals to my sense of family duty. I remained calm, acknowledging their feelings, while standing firm on my decision. You have options, I pointed out. Your house has substantial equity. You could downsize to something more affordable. Nathan could start contributing to household expenses. You could adjust your will to reflect a more equitable distribution that acknowledges my contributions. None of these suggestions were well received. By the time I left, Mom was openly sobbing and Dad was coldly silent, refusing to look at me as I said goodbye. The next day, I drafted a formal letter outlining my decision, the exact date the support would end, and suggestions for alternative financial arrangements they might consider. I sent it by certified mail to ensure there could be no claim they hadn't received proper notice. That same day, I called my bank and scheduled the automatic mortgage transfer to end after February's payment. I set up a new automatic transfer of the same amount, $1,300 monthly, to go into my own savings account instead. The decision was made, the plan executed. A weight lifted from my shoulders even as a new heaviness settled in my heart. I was doing the right thing for myself, setting a necessary boundary, but I took no pleasure in the pain it would cause. Despite everything, they were still my parents, and some small part of me had hoped this ultimatum might make them reconsider their choices, both financially and emotionally. Only time would tell if this boundary would lead to positive change or permanent estrangement. Either way, I had taken back control of my financial future and my self-respect. The first week after February's final payments passed in unusual silence. No calls from my parents, no texts from Nathan. I found myself checking my phone more often than I cared to admit, anticipating the explosion that I knew was coming. It arrived on March 3rd, the day their mortgage payment was due. Mom called first, her voice tight with panic. "Corey, there must be some mistake. The mortgage payment didn't go through." "It's not a mistake, Mom," I replied calmly. "I sent you a letter explaining that February's payment would be the last one I'd make. But we thought you were just upset. We didn't think you'd actually stop paying." Her voice cracked. "What are we supposed to do?" I outlined several options in my letter, I reminded her. "Did you read it?" "Of course we read it," she said defensively. "But none of those options are realistic. We can't sell the house. It's our home. And Nathan barely makes enough to support himself, let alone contribute to our expenses." "Nathan makes enough for a $2,000 gaming system," I pointed out. "He makes choices about his priorities, just as I'm now making choices about mine." The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with Mom in tears again. Dad called an hour later, his approach more direct and confrontational. "You've put us in an impossible situation," he began, without preamble. "The bank called about the missed payment. Do you know what that does to our credit score? I imagine it does the same thing it would do to mine if I missed a payment." I replied. "The difference is I'm paying my own mortgage, not someone else's." "After everything we've done for you," he continued as if I hadn't spoken, "this is how you repay us. By putting our home at risk. I've repaid you many times over, Dad, $108,000 over 3 years to be exact. And yet you decided I deserve nothing in your will." "That damn will again," he muttered. "You're fixated on something that doesn't even matter until we're dead." "It matters now," I insisted. "It reveals how you value, or don't value, my contributions. It shows where I stand in this family." The call ended with Dad threatening that I would regret this decision, though whether that was meant as a prediction or a promise remained unclear. Nathan's reaction came later that same day, in the form of a barrage of angry text messages. "What the fuck, man? Mom and Dad are freaking out about bills. You can't just cut them off like this. It's cruel. They're saying you stopped paying because of their will. That's messed up. That's their money to decide what to do with. Call me as soon as possible. We need to fix this." I didn't respond to the texts, which only escalated Nathan's anger. He called repeatedly, leaving increasingly hostile voicemails. In his worldview, I was the villain, the successful son who had abandoned our parents out of greed and spite. What Nathan failed to understand, or chose not to acknowledge, was that the money paying for our parents' lifestyle had been mine, not theirs. My money that I earned and chose to give them, while he contributed nothing yet stood to inherit everything. The family division spread beyond our immediate circle. Aunt Susan, Dad's sister, called to express her disappointment in my abandonment of my parents. Uncle Robert, Mom's brother, sent an email suggesting I seek therapy for my obvious emotional issues. Cousins took sides on social media, some publicly condemning my selfishness, others privately messaging me to say they understood my position. As March progressed, the financial reality began hitting my parents hard. The mortgage company sent a formal notice about the missed payment. Medical bills went unpaid, resulting in collection calls. Utility companies sent disconnection warnings. Mom's calls became more frequent, and desperate. "We can't afford the minimum payments on everything," she admitted 2 weeks into the month. "We're having to choose between medications and keeping the lights on." That revelation startled me. Their financial situation was apparently worse than I'd realized. They had some retirement income, Dad's pension and their Social Security benefits, which should have covered basic necessities without my help. Where was that money going? I suggested they ask Nathan to help with the shortfall, which led to a telling response. "We can't ask him for money. He's saving up for studio equipment, for his music production business." The stark double standard left me speechless. Nathan's entrepreneurial dreams, which had remained dreams for years without tangible progress, were prioritized over their actual needs. Yet, my established career and financial stability were seen as reasons to expect ongoing support from me. By the end of March, the situation escalated further. Nathan showed up at my condo, unannounced one Saturday morning, pounding on my door until I answered. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded, pushing past me into my living room. "Mom was crying all night because they got a second notice from the mortgage company. They could lose the house." I closed the door calmly. "Hello to you too, Nathan." "Don't be sarcastic," he snapped. "This isn't a joke. Our parents are in serious trouble." "I'm well aware of their financial situation," I replied. "I've been handling their bills for 3 years. Then why stop now?" "Because of some stupid will." That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard. I studied my brother, his expensive haircut designer sneakers and the premium smartwatch on his wrist. All items I would never splurge on for myself, especially not while I was paying our parents' expenses. "It's interesting that you see my decision to stop giving them money as selfish, but you don't see your decision to never start giving them money the same way I observed." Nathan's face flushed. "That's different. You make way more than I do. And you spend way more than you should given your income," I countered. "That new gaming system must have cost at least $2,000. "You're stalking my Instagram now?" he asked incredulously. "I'm observing your priorities," I corrected. "You have money for luxury items, but none to help our parents with essential bills." Nathan paced my living room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "Look, I can't afford to pay their mortgage. You know that." "Neither can they, apparently," I said. "Which raises the question of why they're still in that house. It's too big for them, too expensive to maintain, and they could sell it for a significant profit in this market." "They love that house," Nathan protested. "All our memories are there." "Memories don't pay bills," I said simply. "And neither am I not anymore." Our conversation devolved from there, with Nathan alternatively pleading and threatening, trying to make me resume payments. What he never did was offer to contribute himself, even partially. The responsibility in his mind was entirely mine. Before he left, Nathan delivered what he clearly thought was a devastating blow. "They're thinking of taking out a reverse mortgage. Do you know what that means?" "It means there might not be a house left to inherit at all." I simply nodded. That would be their choice. Just like the will was their choice. And just like stopping my payments was my choice. After Nathan stormed out, I sat in my quiet condo, turning over this new information. A reverse mortgage would indeed likely consume most of the equity in the house, potentially leaving little to nothing for either of us to inherit. Was that their attempt at punishing me? Making sure that if I didn't resume payments, I was ensuring neither of us would inherit the house. If so, it revealed just how little they understood my decision. This wasn't about ensuring I got the house or any inheritance. It was about being valued, respected, and treated fairly after years of sacrifice. If there was nothing left to inherit, so be it. At least I would no longer be financing a future from which I was explicitly excluded. April arrived with an unexpected sense of lightness. The $3,000 that had previously gone to my parents each month was now building my own savings, creating a tangible sense of progress toward my long-deferred personal goals. I'd been putting off seeking therapy for years, always finding reasons why the time wasn't right or the expense wasn't justified. Now, with both the financial means and the emotional imperative, I finally made the call and scheduled my first appointment with Dr. Miranda Jacobs, a therapist specializing in family dynamics. What you're describing is a classic enabling relationship. Dr. Jacobs observed during our second session, by continually rescuing your parents and brother from the consequences of their financial decisions, you've been preventing them from developing their own solutions. I thought I was being responsible, I said. Taking care of family. There's a difference between supporting family and enabling dysfunction, she explained. Healthy support has boundaries and reciprocity. What you've described lacks both. These sessions became a weekly anchor, helping me process not just the recent conflict, but years of family patterns that had shaped my self-perception and behavior. I began to recognize how my identity, as the responsible one, had been both a source of pride and a burden that limited my own happiness. At Dr. Jacobs' suggestion, I started a journal to track my emotions about the family situation. An unexpected pattern emerged as angry and hurt as I felt about my parents' actions. I also experienced significant guilt for withdrawing support, particularly when Mom called with updates about missed medications or utility shutoff notices. The guilt is natural, Dr. Jacobs assured me. But ask yourself, whose responsibility are these bills ultimately? And has your intervention truly helped them develop sustainable solutions, or just postponed the inevitable reckoning with their financial reality? These questions helped me maintain my boundary, even as the pressure from family increased. Dad had stopped speaking to me entirely. Mom alternated between tearful pleas and angry accusations. Nathan had taken to posting passive-aggressive social media comments about family loyalty that were clearly directed at me. Meanwhile, I was making changes in other areas of my life. I joined a rock climbing gym, something I'd always wanted to try but had never found the time for while juggling my own life and my parents' needs. I started taking Spanish classes at the community center, preparing for the international trip I was now planning for the following year. Most significantly, I met Allison. We connected at a financial literacy workshop I'd volunteered to help teach at the local library. She was there to improve her budgeting skills after a divorce had left her rebuilding her financial life. Smart, pragmatic, and refreshingly direct, Allison caught my attention immediately with her insightful questions and dry humor. Our first date was coffee after the final workshop session. Our second was dinner at a local bistro. By our third date, a hiking trail outside the city, I found myself sharing the full story of my family situation. So you were basically their retirement plan, she summarized after I explained everything. Without your consent or even acknowledgement. Put that way, the injustice seemed even clearer. I guess I was. And now you're establishing boundaries, she continued. Good for you. That takes real courage. Her support was a stark contrast to the judgment I'd received from extended family. Allison understood boundaries in a way my family never had, having had to establish her own after her divorce. My ex used to call me selfish whenever I wanted to spend money on myself instead of his hobbies, she shared. It took me years to recognize that pattern for what it was: manipulation. Our relationship developed gradually over the spring months. We were both cautious, both carrying experiences that made us value honesty and clear communication above grand romantic gestures. By June, we were seeing each other several times a week, our lives intertwining in comfortable, supportive ways. Meanwhile, my parents' situation was evolving in unexpected directions. In early May, Mom called with news that they had decided to list their house for sale. We can't keep up with the payments, she admitted, and the maintenance is too much for us anyway. I expressed support for their decision, careful not to say I told you so despite having suggested this very solution months earlier. We found a nice 2-bedroom condo in a retirement community, she continued. It's much more affordable and has amenities like lawn care included. This was the first practical step they'd taken to address their financial reality without my intervention. While I suspected their decision was made out of necessity rather than insight, it was progress nonetheless. More surprising was the news about Nathan. He's moved out, Mom mentioned casually during the same call. Got an apartment with a friend from the bar. Really? This was unexpected. Nathan had lived rent-free in their basement for years, showing no signs of wanting independence. Yes, well, Mom hedged with the house being sold. He didn't have much choice. He's not happy about it. I bet he's not, I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I asked, is he helping with any of your expenses now? A telling pause. He's figuring out his own budget first. But he did drive us to some medical appointments last week. It wasn't financial support, but it was something. A small step toward Nathan taking on some responsibility for our parents' well-being. The most significant revelation came in June, when I received a call from Richard Bennett, the attorney I'd consulted back in January. Your parents came to see me, he said, surprising me completely. They wanted me to review some financial documents. Attorney-client privilege prevented him from sharing specifics. But the fact that they'd sought legal advice from the same attorney I'd consulted was interesting. They mentioned you'd recommended me, Richard continued. I thought you might want to know they're taking steps to get their affairs in order more thoroughly. Later that week, I received an email from a financial advisor named Jennifer Torres, introducing herself as my parents' new financial planner. Your parents have authorized me to share some information with you, she wrote. They've discovered some investment accounts they'd forgotten about from a small inheritance your father received years ago. These accounts have grown significantly and will help stabilize their retirement. This revelation was both a relief and a frustration. My parents had had assets they hadn't even remembered while I'd been stretching my budget to support them. Had they truly needed my help all along? Or had their financial disorganization created an artificial crisis? July brought another unexpected development. Dad called me directly. Our first conversation in months. Your mother and I have been doing some thinking, he said, his voice gruff, but lacking the anger I'd grown accustomed to. We've updated our will. My heart beat faster. Oh, we've decided to split things more evenly, he continued. The proceeds from the house sale, the investment accounts Jennifer found, our personal effects. It will all be divided equally between you and Nathan. I sat down absorbing this information. What changed your mind? A long pause. These past few months have been educational, he finally said. We had to face some realities we'd been avoiding. About money. About responsibility. About fairness. It wasn't an apology, but from my proud father it was as close as I was likely to get. The updated will wouldn't undo the past hurt, but it represented an acknowledgement of my place in the family that had previously been denied. Thank you for telling me, I said simply. We should have dinner sometime, Dad suggested awkwardly. The four of us. It's been a while. I'd like that, I replied, surprised to find I meant it. As summer progressed into early fall, my relationship with my parents began a slow, tentative healing. Our interactions were more measured, more equal. They no longer called with financial emergencies, and I no longer felt the weight of being their safety net. Nathan and I remained distant, our few interactions, civil but cool. He was struggling to adjust to paying his own way in the world, a transition that was long overdue but undeniably difficult. Part of me hoped that eventually this new reality might forge a more balanced relationship between us, but I was no longer willing to sacrifice my well-being waiting for that to happen. By October, 1 year after finding the will that changed everything, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. My savings had grown substantially. My relationship with Allison had deepened into something serious and nurturing. My therapy sessions had helped me develop healthier boundaries, not just with family, but in all relationships. Most importantly, I'd reclaimed my sense of self-worth, no longer measuring my value by how much I sacrificed for others. Sometimes, the inheritance you need most isn't money or property, but the freedom to prioritize your own well-being without guilt. 6 months after my parents sold their house, I sat on the balcony of my new home, a charming 3-bedroom house with a small backyard, reflecting on how much had changed. The down payment had come from the savings I'd accumulated since stopping my parents' support, a tangible result of my decision to prioritize my own financial future. Inside, Allison was preparing dinner for a special occasion. My parents were coming over for the first time since I'd moved in. Our relationship had gradually evolved into something I wouldn't have recognized a year earlier. More balanced, more honest, with clearer boundaries on both sides. My parents had settled into their retirement community condo, which turned out to suit them better than their oversized house ever had. The maintenance-free living and built-in social activities addressed needs they hadn't even realized they had. The proceeds from selling their house, combined with the investment accounts they'd rediscovered, provided them with financial stability without requiring my support. Nathan had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation, though not without significant struggle. The harsh reality of adult financial responsibility had initially sent him into a tailspin of resentment and self-pity. He'd cycled through 3 different apartments and 2 roommates before finally accepting that his lifestyle needed to align with his actual income. He'd recently taken a full-time position managing the bar, where he'd previously worked part-time, his first stable job with benefits and advancement potential. While he still harbored some resentment toward me for forcing this change by withdrawing support from our parents, he'd grudgingly admitted that the regular income and structure had improved his overall well-being. More surprisingly, he'd begun taking online courses in business management, a practical step that contrasted sharply with his years of vague networking for his music production dreams. Those dreams hadn't disappeared, but they'd been right-sized into a weekend hobby rather than an excuse for avoiding responsibility. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. I welcomed my parents with genuine warmth, noticing how much more relaxed they both appeared compared to a year ago. Mom had a new hairstyle that suited her age instead of fighting it, and Dad moved with less pain since starting the physical therapy program at their community center. "The house is beautiful, honey," Mom said as I gave them a tour. "You must be so proud." "I am," I agreed. "It took a lot of saving and planning, but it was worth it." Dad nodded approvingly as he examined the solid construction and practical features. "You made a good investment here. Property in this neighborhood will appreciate well." This practical acknowledgement of my financial decisions represented significant growth from the man who had once dismissed my concerns about inheritance as materialism. Dinner was pleasant conversation, flowing more easily than it had in years. We avoided rehashing old conflicts, focusing instead on current events and future plans. When Mom mentioned having recently updated their medical directives and financial powers of attorney, the topic that had once been so divisive was now discussed openly. "We've made sure everything is properly documented and fair," she said, meeting my eyes deliberately. "Both of you boys are treated equally in all our arrangements now." I appreciate that I responded simply. After dessert, as Allison cleared the plates, Dad unexpectedly raised his glass in a toast. "To lessons learned," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Sometimes the hardest ones are the most valuable." The acknowledgement, however, indirect, of the difficult journey we'd all undertaken over the past year brought a lump to my throat. We'd all lost something in the process, the comfortable illusions and patterns that had defined our family for decades, but we'd gained something more valuable: authenticity and respect. After my parents left, Allison and I sat on the porch swing in the cool evening air. "That went well," she observed, her head resting on my shoulder. "Better than I expected," I agreed. "There's still tension with Nathan, though." He declined the invitation to join us. "Give him time," Allison advised. He's still adjusting to the new normal. It took you years to reach your breaking point. It might take him a while to process his. Her wisdom was one of the many reasons I'd fallen in love with her. Allison understood the complex nature of family healing. How it rarely followed a neat cinematic arc of conflict and resolution, but instead moved in fits and starts with progress measured in small moments rather than grand gestures. In the months that followed, that progress continued in unexpected ways. Nathan and I began a tentative rebuilding of our relationship, starting with occasional text messages and gradually expanding to monthly dinners. Without our parents' enabling presence, creating an imbalance between us, we slowly discovered aspects of each other we'd never appreciated before. My parents continued their journey toward greater financial responsibility and transparency. They worked with their financial advisor to create a sustainable budget and even began taking classes on money management at their community center, something they'd resisted for decades. As for me, the decision to stop financing my parents' lifestyle had cascading positive effects beyond my financial well-being. I developed healthier boundaries in all relationships. I became more direct about my needs and expectations. I recognized patterns of enabling behavior in other areas of my life and addressed them proactively. Most importantly, I learned that love and support shouldn't come at the cost of my own well-being. True family relationships are reciprocal balancing, giving and receiving in ways that respect everyone's dignity and agency. The inheritance issue that had initially triggered this transformation ultimately became secondary to the greater inheritance I'd claimed. Self-respect and authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Sometimes the most valuable family legacy isn't money or property, but the lessons we learn about our own worth and the courage to insist that others recognize it too. In walking away from an inheritance that excluded me, I found something far more precious: the knowledge that I deserve to be valued, not just for what I could provide, but for who I am. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who took your support for granted? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of reclaiming self-worth resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories like this, and share with someone who might need encouragement to value themselves. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop giving when that giving harms you. Thank you for listening, and take care of yourselves out there.